There are nights when the sky stops being just a backdrop. It becomes an event. In human history, there have been few such nights, and each one left behind not just memories, but a deep scar on the collective consciousness, a premonition that the world we knew might never be the same again. We're talking about nights when a drama unfolded on the celestial stage, so vast and alien that all our earthly affairs, our wars, and our triumphs suddenly seemed like insignificant squabbling in a sandbox. The night of October 27th to the 28th, 2025, was one of those nights. It began quietly. At first, it was just scattered reports, flaring up on social media like distant signal fires. An amateur photographer in the Atacama Desert, Chile, who had been shooting the Milky Way for hours, suddenly saw something rising above the horizon, unlike any phenomenon he knew. It wasn't the aurora borealis, not here, so close to the equator. It was a slowly pulsing violet curtain pierced by thin, needle-like emerald rays. He thought it was an artifact on his camera lens. Then, the pilot of a Boeing 787 flying over the Pacific Ocean at an altitude of 11,000 meters, about 36,000 feet, reported structured light phenomena directly on his course to air traffic control. Giant vertical columns of red light shooting from the tops of storm clouds upward into the stratosphere like silent discharges from an impossible weapon. His voice on the recording sounded calm, but beneath that professional composure was a deep, profound astonishment. Almost simultaneously, a family in a small village in Rajasthan, India, who had stepped outside to escape the stifling heat, looked up and froze. Above them, in a completely cloudless sky, a giant, luminous river was slowly drifting. It didn't twinkle like the stars. It flowed. A thin, narrow ribbon of shimmering purple light stretching from one horizon to the other. It looked like a scar, an incision in the very fabric of the night. This phenomenon, known to a small circle of scientists as Steve, usually appears at high latitudes and is extremely rare. But on this night, it was here, over the tropics, and it was witnessed by millions. Over the next 3 hours, the planet was plunged into a silent, luminous chaos. Reports poured in from everywhere, from South Africa, from Australia, from the Canary Islands, from central Kansas. The sky was on fire, but it was a cold fire, a silent, unearthly light taking on the most bizarre forms. Red sprites, resembling city-sized jellyfish, flashed for a fraction of a second above storm fronts. Blue jets shot upward from the clouds for tens of kilometers. And above it all, in the most unexpected places, these strange, geometrically perfect structures appeared and vanished. Glowing grids, pulsing arcs, perfect spirals. It was as if someone had turned on a giant projector and started displaying their blueprints on the dome of our atmosphere. Official science channels were silent. Meteorological agencies were in disarray. Their models had nothing that could explain what was happening. This was not a magnetic storm in the classic sense. The auroras, those familiar and understandable dances of light, remained in their places near the magnetic poles. But this was something else. This was a trickster event. A phenomenon that didn't fit into any existing paradigm, that broke all the rules. It was too massive, too global, too strange. And while millions of people on Earth watched, holding their breath, unable to tear their eyes from this frightening and beautiful spectacle, a handful of astronomers in a few dozen observatories around the world were observing another, no less important event. An event taking place in deep space, at a distance of almost 150 million kilometers, about 93 million miles from us. In the absolute silence of the vacuum, the giant interstellar object, catalogued as 3I Atlas, was passing its perihelion, the closest point to the sun in its orbit. Imagine for a moment what perihelion is for a comet or an asteroid. It's a moment of maximum stress, maximum drama. An icy body dormant for billions of years in the cold of interstellar space, is suddenly plunged into the infernal furnace of the solar corona. The solar wind, a stream of charged particles, rips material from its surface. Ice turns directly into vapor, bypassing the liquid phase, in a process called sublimation. Powerful jets of gas and dust erupt from the nucleus, creating a coma and a tail that stretch for millions of kilometers. It is a moment of truth for any celestial body. But 3I Atlas was not an ordinary celestial body. From the moment of its discovery by the Atlas Observatory in Hawaii 2 years ago, it had behaved incorrectly. First, its trajectory. It wasn't just hyperbolic, which indicated its extrasolar origin. Its eccentricity, the degree of its orbital elongation, was so great that the object seemed to have come from nowhere, from a patch of sky with no visible star clusters that could have pushed it towards us. It moved as if someone had deliberately aimed it at our system. Second, its size and composition. Preliminary calculations showed it to be a giant, possibly up to 50 kilometers, about 31 miles, in diameter, an object the size of a small continent. Yet its behavior did not match that of an icy comet. It showed almost no outgassing where it should have. Its brightness changed unpredictably, flaring and dimming for no apparent reason. Spectral analysis revealed the presence of heavy metals and complex organic compounds, but an almost complete absence of water ice. Official science cautiously called it a unique representative of the interstellar object population, but on private forums for amateur astronomers and in private correspondence, it was called something else. It was called an artifact. And on that very night, as our sky was consumed by the fire of anomalous auroras, this giant, strange object was performing its most dangerous maneuver. At 3 hours and 11 minutes Coordinated Universal Time, according to calculations by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, 3I Atlas crossed the ecliptic plane and entered its perihelion, the moment of closest approach to the sun, the moment of maximum energy exposure. And at that exact moment, to the minute, the first, most powerful flashes of anomalous light phenomena were recorded over the Pacific Ocean. 2 events. One, here, in the fragile shell of our atmosphere. The other, out there, in the merciless void of space. At first glance, they have nothing in common. Absolutely nothing. A distance of 1 astronomical unit. Different physical processes. Different scales. Any sane scientist will tell you it's a coincidence. A simple, random, albeit incredibly beautiful, coincidence. Correlation does not imply causation. It's a mantra repeated in every university. And they are right. But sometimes coincidences are so perfect, so precise, so elegant in their synchronicity, that the very idea of randomness seems far more fantastical than the most audacious hypothesis. What if it wasn't a coincidence? What if it was choreography? A flawlessly executed performance where one event was the cause and the other the effect. Where a giant machine in space, heated to its limit in the rays of our sun, did something, and our sky answered it. The world held its breath, waiting for explanations. Social media buzzed with theories, each more outlandish than the last. From tests of new climate weapons and mass hallucinations, to signs of the end times and first contact. People needed an answer. They needed the authoritative, calm voice of science to put everything in its place, to reassure them, and to restore a sense of control. And after 12 hours of tense silence, as the first rays of morning sun began to erase the traces of the night's miracle from the sky, NASA, in collaboration with the European Space Agency and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, released an official statement. It was elegant, scientific, and utterly reassuring. According to the press release, the planet had witnessed the effects of a rare but natural event, a so-called cannibal coronal mass ejection. The idea was that two separate ejections of solar plasma, one slow, the other fast, were emitted by the sun a few hours apart. The fast ejection caught up with the slow one, merged with it, creating a single, incredibly powerful, and structurally complex plasma front. This enhanced front, they said, struck Earth's magnetosphere at a very specific, oblique angle, causing not only powerful auroras but also a cascade of instabilities in the ionosphere at lower latitudes, which led to the appearance of sprites, jets, and the Steve phenomenon on an unprecedented scale. It was the perfect explanation. It was logical. It was based on known physical processes. It returned the source of all anomalies to where it belongs. The sun, 150 million kilometers, about 93 million miles, away. It turned a terrifying mystery into a simple, albeit rare, natural phenomenon. And it would have been completely convincing, if not for one small but critically important detail. The data from solar observatories, both space-based, like SOHO and the Solar Dynamics Observatory, and ground-based, showed nothing of the sort. There was no cannibal ejection. In fact, in the days leading up to the event, the sun had been surprisingly calm. The numbers just didn't add up. And this was no longer just a coincidence. This was the beginning of a cover-up. When the official story emerges, it always possesses a special, almost hypnotic power. It arrives cloaked in the authority of institutions whose names command respect and trust. NASA, ESA, NOAA. These acronyms sound like incantations, capable of banishing chaos and returning the world to its familiar, predictable state. Their explanation was exactly that, a flawless piece of scientific narrative. The concept of a cannibal coronal mass ejection was not just a hypothesis, it was a work of scientific poetry. Imagine the sun not as a calm, yellow ball, but as a boiling cauldron of thermonuclear energy, constantly hurling chunks of its own substance into space. These chunks, coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, are essentially stellar tsunamis, billions of tons of superheated magnetized plasma hurtling through the solar system at speeds of hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers per second. Most of them miss us, lost in the infinite void. But sometimes, when an ejection is aimed directly at Earth, it engages in a dramatic confrontation with our planet. To understand what happened next, according to the official version, you have to picture this cosmic race. First, as NASA claimed, the sun produced a relatively slow but massive ejection. It moved towards Earth like a heavy, lumbering wave. A few hours later, from the same active region on the sun, a second ejection occurred. Much faster, more furious, and more concentrated. It was a stellar predator chasing its prey. Over the course of 2 or 3 days, as they traveled across 150 million kilometers, about 93 million miles, of interplanetary space, the fast wave relentlessly gained on the slow one. And then, somewhere halfway to Earth, the event that gave the phenomenon its sinister name occurred. The fast CME slammed into the back of the slow one, engulfed it, ate it. From this collision, something new was born. A single, incredibly complex and energetically charged plasma front. Its magnetic fields were compressed and intertwined, its density multiplied, and the shock wave preceding it became exceptionally powerful. It was this monster, this hybrid of two solar storms, according to the scientists, that slammed into Earth on the night of October 27th to the 28th. Their description of this superstorm's interaction with Earth was no less impressive. Our planet, as we know, is protected by an invisible force field, the magnetosphere. It's a giant magnetic bubble, created by the rotation of Earth's liquid metal core. It extends into space for tens of thousands of kilometers and deflects most of the deadly solar wind. When a CME hits this shield, a grand battle ensues. The magnetic fields of the ejection and the fields of the Earth collide, compress, and reconnect in a complex process, releasing a colossal amount of energy. Solar plasma particles, caught in this process, rush along the magnetic field lines towards the poles, crash into oxygen and nitrogen atoms in the upper atmosphere, and cause them to glow. This is how auroras are born. But on that night, the press release stated, everything was different. The impact was so strong, and the angle of attack so unusual, that it didn't just cause auroras at the poles. It literally breached the magnetosphere in several places, triggering a global destabilization of the entire ionosphere. The electrically charged layer of the atmosphere extending from 60 to 1,000 kilometers, about 37 to 620 miles, above the surface. It was this unprecedented destabilization, they said, that gave rise to the cascade of exotic phenomena. Sprites, jets, Steve, all were mere symptoms, the death throes of our atmosphere after receiving a blow of incredible force. The explanation was exhaustive. It linked all observed effects into a single, logical chain. It was scientific, and it was a lie. The first crack in this beautiful construct appeared not as a result of complex analysis or an insider leak. It appeared where the truth is most often hidden in the 21st century, in publicly accessible but extremely dull archives of raw data. Anyone with an internet connection and enough patience can go to the website of the SOHO mission, a joint project of NASA and ESA that has been continuously observing the sun for almost 30 years. One of its key instruments is the LASCO coronagraph. Its job is simple. It creates an artificial eclipse, blocking the bright disk of the sun with a small occulting disk to see what is normally hidden in its blinding rays, the faint, tenuous corona, from where coronal mass ejections are born. These are our eyes, our forward post that warns of impending solar storms. If a cannibal ejection had really occurred, LASCO would have seen it. Moreover, it would have been the most spectacular event in many years of observation. We would have seen first one massive halo of plasma slowly expanding from the sun, and then a second, brighter and faster one, catching up and engulfing the first. It would have been on every news channel. But when you open the archive of LASCO images for the 48 hours before the Trickster event, you see almost nothing. Silence. Calm. The sun was emitting its usual slow solar wind, as it always does. A few minor flares were recorded on the edge of the disk, but none were directed towards Earth, and none were accompanied by any significant mass ejection. There was no first CME, no second CME. There was no cosmic drama. The cannon that, according to NASA, had fired at us was cold. Perhaps LASCO had failed? Unlikely, but let's assume so. We have other instruments. For example, the Solar Dynamics Observatory, or SDO. This satellite looks directly at the sun's disk in several ultraviolet wavelengths, allowing us to see giant plasma loops, flares, and other manifestations of solar activity in stunning detail. SDO data for the same period confirmed the picture painted by LASCO. Yes, there were active regions on the sun, but they were stable. There were no signs of the large-scale destabilization of magnetic structures that always precedes powerful ejections. It was like meteorologists announcing a Category 5 hurricane while all the barometers in the region showed clear, sunny weather. The discrepancy was not just noticeable. It was glaring. It was absolute. The energy budget of the event was off by several orders of magnitude. To cause atmospheric phenomena on such a global scale required an impact equivalent to hundreds of millions of hydrogen bombs. And the data from the solar observatories showed, at best, the pop of a party popper. But that's not all. There is a decentralized network that the system cannot control. It's an army of amateur astronomers around the world. Thousands of people with high-quality telescopes equipped with special hydrogen alpha filters who point their instruments at the sun every clear day and take stunning images of its chromosphere. They communicate on forums, sharing their observations. It's a global, independent monitoring system. And in those days, their verdict was unanimous. On the Cloudy Nights forum in the solar observation section, the usual routine discussion of prominences and sunspot groups was taking place. No one, not a single experienced observer out of hundreds of active participants, recorded anything extraordinary. Their collective silence was deafening. It was the most compelling evidence that the official version was a fiction. And this is where the investigation moves from the realm of science to the realm of psychology and politics. Could the world's top experts from NASA, ESA, and NOAA have been so wrong? All of them? Simultaneously? Could they, with access to all the same data as us, have reached a diametrically opposite conclusion? The answer is obvious. No. This was not a mistake. It was a choice. It was a conscious decision to present the public with a convenient, understandable, and most importantly, natural cause for an inexplicable event. They were not analyzing reality. They were constructing it. If you reread their initial press release carefully, armed with this new knowledge, it starts to look completely different. The cautious, vague phrasing that once seemed a sign of scientific rigor now looks like legal loopholes. Preliminary models indicate the most likely explanation is data is still being analyzed. This is not the language of certainty. It is the language of disinformation. They created an information smokescreen. And the purpose of any smokescreen is to hide something more important, to hide what they don't want us to look at. They deliberately directed the world's gaze to the sun, to the familiar and understandable source of cosmic threats, to distract us from the true culprit, from that other event that occurred on the same night, with the same perfect synchronicity, from the perihelion passage of Object 3I Atlas. They didn't lie because they didn't know the truth. They lied because the truth was too terrifying to voice. The problem wasn't that their model was wrong. The problem was that they ignored all the data that contradicted it. They replaced an inconvenient reality with a convenient simulation. And that is no longer a mistake. It is a cover-up. The explanation wasn't an analysis. It was a shield. And the main question now was different. Not what caused these lights in the sky, but what exactly were they trying to hide behind the dazzling flash of a non-existent solar storm? And the answer to that question was slowly drifting in the darkness of space, getting closer with every second. When the official story collapses, the investigation inevitably moves into the shadows. It shifts from the bright pages of press releases to the dark, dusty corners of digital archives. These archives are modern cathedrals, grand repositories of our collective knowledge, where petabytes of information lie like the relics of saints, waiting for a believer or a heretic to come and study them. They promise us transparency. They promise that every bit of information collected with taxpayer money will be available to anyone who wants to find it. It's a beautiful democratic idea. But like any cathedral, these digital vaults have their dark basements, their locked crypts, and their secret chambers where not everyone is admitted. And it is there, in the deafening silence of missing data, that the real truth is often hidden. Realizing that the solar storm story was just a diversion, I turned to the only source that couldn't lie directly: the raw data from the International Space Station. The ISS is not just an orbital laboratory. It is our constant, sleepless eye, hanging at an altitude of 400 kilometers, about 250 miles, above the planet. The station is festooned with dozens of cameras and sensors that look at the Earth, at space, at the stars, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their data streams are a continuous chronicle of our planet's life. I was interested in a very specific instrument, one of several external high-resolution spectrographic imagers installed on the Japanese Kibo module. Its official mission is to monitor high-altitude clouds, analyze the chemical composition of the atmosphere, and study the night glow. Simply put, it is designed to photograph the very phenomena, sprites, jets, auroras, that were the main characters of the trickster event. If anyone could have captured what really happened, it was this instrument. The process of obtaining this data, like everything in big science, is strictly regulated and automated. Imagine an assembly line. The camera takes a picture. A few seconds later, that picture, along with thousands of other telemetry packets, is sent via a narrow radio beam to one of the tracking and data relay satellites, TDRS, in geostationary orbit. From there, the signal is relayed to Earth, to a giant antenna at the White Sands complex in New Mexico. Then, the raw, level 0 file enters a complex automated processing system. And this is where it gets interesting. Before the data becomes public, it passes through a filter. A complex algorithm based on a neural network trained on millions of images sifts through the stream, rejecting junk. What is considered junk? Glare from the sun as the station emerges from Earth's shadow. Artifacts caused by high-energy cosmic rays hitting the sensor. Images taken during optics recalibration. All of this is tagged with an appropriate error code and sent to an archive for engineers, never making it into the public catalog. The remaining clean images undergo further processing, receive standard metadata, and are typically published on the public ISS Earth Observation Gateway portal within 24 to 48 hours. This protocol has worked like clockwork for years. It's reliable, predictable, and transparent. And it was its flawless past performance that allowed me to spot the anomaly. I went to the portal and made a simple query. All images from the specified instrument for a 72-hour period centered on the night of the trickster event. I expected to see thousands of images. I expected to see stunning, unprecedented shots of purple rivers and red jellyfish flooding the atmosphere. But instead, I saw emptiness. No, not complete emptiness. The files were there. Their timestamps, their sequence numbers, their metadata. It was all there. But instead of the images themselves, instead of the previews that should have been there, were hundreds of identical gray placeholders, and next to each one was the same flag, the same short, faceless message. Error 515, sensor saturation. This was not a coincidence. It was not a one-off glitch. It was a systematic blanket purge. I started scrolling through the list, file after file, error after error. 515, 515, 515. During an 8-hour window that perfectly coincided with the peak of the anomalous atmospheric phenomena, over 90% of all images taken by this camera were marked as invalid and hidden from public access. It was as if in a history book, all the pages from the chapter describing a key battle had been torn out, and in their place, only a single note was left. Nothing happened here. But the system, in its attempt to hide the truth, always leaves tracks. It is too cumbersome and clumsy to act perfectly cleanly. And its track was in the metadata. Every file, even one marked as erroneous, still contained information about where the ISS was at the moment the picture was taken. And when I plotted the coordinates of these erroneous shots on a world map, a chill ran down my spine. The gaps in the data were not random. They did not correspond to the station crossing the terminator, where one might expect glare from the rising sun. They did not correspond to known high radiation zones, like the South Atlantic anomaly, where cosmic rays could cause glitches. No. The geography of these gaps, perfectly, with frightening precision, matched the geography of reports of the strangest light phenomena coming from Earth. An erroneous shot over Chile, taken at the exact moment the photographer in the Atacama was capturing his purple veil. A whole series of corrupted frames over the Pacific. The timestamps matched, minute by minute, with the Boeing pilot's report of giant red sprites. A long chain of files marked with error 515 over India. It exactly mirrored the trajectory of that same luminous purple river that the family in Rajasthan had observed. This was no longer a coincidence. It was a perfect 100% correlation. Where people on Earth saw a miracle, our eye in space suddenly went blind. The picture was becoming clear and at the same time, monstrous. The official story of a solar storm was the first line of defense. It was meant to satisfy the curiosity of the general public and the media. But for those who, like me, decided to dig deeper, a second layer was in place. A technological one. An algorithm that automatically hid any direct evidence. Error 515 was not a technical report. It was a censorship tag. So what is sensor saturation? In simple terms, it's when too much light hits the camera's sensor. The pixels overflow, information is lost, and you just get a white blob. This would be logical if the ISS were filming, for example, a nuclear explosion. But could the atmospheric glow, however bright it seemed from Earth, completely blind a camera designed for space photography? A camera that regularly looks at stars, at lightning, at the sun reflected off clouds? Extremely unlikely. But what if the light it saw wasn't just bright? What if it was different? What if its spectral characteristics, its coherence, its structure were so alien, so far beyond anything the neural network had been trained on, that the algorithm couldn't classify it as anything other than a fundamental error? What if it wasn't an oversaturation of light, but an oversaturation of information? And here we come to the heart of the mystery. They hid this data. They built an entire architecture of lies so no one could see it. And that can only mean one thing. What was in those images didn't just refute their story about a solar storm. It proved something far more important. Something so strange, so unprecedented, that they went to extreme measures to bury it in a digital grave under a faceless tombstone with the number 515. The silence wasn't random. It was the answer. The answer to what the camera on the Kibo module saw in those 8 missing hours. It didn't just see beautiful lights in the sky. It saw a mechanism. It saw what no one on Earth could see. It saw the hand that lit this fire. And that hand was reaching not from the sun. It was reaching from the icy darkness from which 3-Eye Atlas had come. When the system erects a wall of silence, it makes one fundamental mistake. It assumes that it controls all channels of information. All access points to reality. It believes in its monopoly on the truth. But in the modern world, that monopoly is an illusion. The global scientific machine is too large, too complex, and most importantly, too international to be completely controlled from a single center. There are partnership agreements, joint projects, data exchange protocols between dozens of countries, and in this complex web of interconnections, there will always be cracks. Independent nodes, people and organizations who value scientific truth above corporate loyalty or political expediency. It was one of these cracks that became the breakthrough that turned suspicion into certainty. The investigation had hit a dead end. I knew the hidden files existed. I knew where they should be. But I didn't have the key to the digital prison where they were held. And so I turned to the Oracle. In our narrative, the Oracle is not a mystical figure. It's an archetype. It could be an amateur astronomer who accidentally filmed something he shouldn't have seen. It could be a hacker who discovered a vulnerability in a secure network. Or, as in this case, it could be a scientist working within the system itself, but on its periphery. A person with access, but not bound by an oath of silence. My Oracle was Dr. Stefan Burns, This is a fictional name, of course. His true identity must remain in the shadows, for what he did is a direct violation of his non-disclosure agreement. Burns is a plasma physicist working in a small research group at a European university, which is a partner of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. And JAXA, in turn, is the operator of the very Kibo module on the ISS, where our blinded camera is installed. Their university has a direct encrypted channel to the Level 0 data, the most primary raw telemetry stream that comes from the station, even before it hits NASA's American filters. They need this access to calibrate their own experiments on board the station. Usually they only work with their own equipment, ignoring the terabytes of information coming from neighboring instruments. But not this time. I contacted Burns through a secure messenger laying out my suspicions. I showed him the timeline. The perfect match between the Trickster event, the perihelion passage of 3I Atlas, and the sudden total failure of the camera. I showed him the map of the missing data. His reaction was predictable for any true scientist. First, healthy skepticism. He suggested it could be a real malfunction, caused, for example, by an unexpected static discharge on the station's hull. But the very idea that data could have been deliberately hidden struck a nerve. For people like Burns, free access to information is a sacred principle. The very possibility of censorship in science is heresy to him. And he agreed to check. He promised nothing. He only said he would look at the logs. A week passed. A week of deafening silence, during which I was almost certain he had decided not to risk his career for the conspiracy theory of an anonymous researcher. And then, at 3 a.m, a file arrived in my secure account. A single file, several gigabytes in size, without a single word in the accompanying message. It wasn't even a video. It was a raw telemetry data packet, a set of numbers that would look like gibberish to the uninitiated. But attached to the file was a small Python script with a concise comment. Run. Use spectral visualizer for L0 channel. I did as instructed. I ran the script. My computer hummed intensely for a few minutes, processing the data array. And then, an image appeared on the screen. And at that moment, I understood that our conception of the universe, of our place in it, was not just incomplete. It was childishly naive. It was one of those corrupted frames. One of the hundreds marked with error 515. The timestamp indicated 3 hours and 14 minutes universal time. 3 minutes after 3I Atlas entered its perihelion. The camera at that moment was aimed not down at the Earth, but sideways at the planet's limb, at the thin, glowing edge of the atmosphere visible against the blackness of space. What I saw was like nothing else. It was not sensor saturation. It was not a white blob. The image was crystal clear. It showed the curved line of the Earth's atmosphere, backlit from below by the lights of cities at night. And above, in the void, hung the object. 3I Atlas. It was too far away to distinguish details on its surface. In the picture, it looked like a bright but tiny dot, indistinguishable from a distant star. But from this dot, threads stretched towards Earth. Imagine a spiderweb woven from pure light, not beams, not streams. These were the finest, almost invisible, perfectly straight lines of emerald green and violet color. There were hundreds, if not thousands of them. They emanated not from the center of the object, but as if from an invisible sphere around it, and streamed down towards the upper layers of the ionosphere. They resembled the mycelium of a giant cosmic fungus, sprouting from 3I Atlas and touching our planet with its ethereal tendrils. And there, at the points of contact, where these energy filaments entered the atmosphere, it responded. It lit up. Each point of entry blossomed into a complex fractal pattern of light, similar to a discharge in a plasma ball. These patterns merged, intertwined, creating the very giant, structured light network that people on Earth had seen as anomalous auroras. This was not just a glow. It was a dialogue. It was an active, purposeful transfer of energy on a planetary scale. I viewed the data packet to the end. Burns had sent me not one, but 3 consecutive frames, taken seconds apart. In the second frame, there were more threads. They were brighter. The atmospheric response intensified. In the third frame, everything vanished. The threads retracted. The glow in the atmosphere instantly died out. The entire process took no more than 10 seconds. It was like the operation of some colossal, unimaginable mechanism that switched on, performed its function, and switched off. Now it was clear why the algorithm had flagged this as an error. The neural network, trained on millions of images of natural phenomena, auroras, lightning, meteors, simply had nothing like it in its database. To it, perfectly straight, coherent lines of light crossing hundreds of thousands of kilometers of empty space were physically impossible. It was an absolute 100% artifact, a matrix error, an optical glitch, anything but reality. The algorithm did exactly what it was designed to do. It filtered out an anomaly that did not fit into its picture of the world. But it wasn't an error. It was the smoking gun, the photograph of a ghost. These frames didn't just refute the official version, they offered a new, far more disturbing one. They proved that the anomalous auroras were not a passive reaction of our atmosphere to an external impact, as in the case of a solar storm. They were the result of a direct, targeted, and highly technological influence. 3i Atlas wasn't just passing by. It was interacting with us. It was doing something to our atmosphere. And here we enter the territory of pure, cold speculation, because we have no precedents for analyzing such events. What were these threads? What is their physical mechanism? Were they laser beams? Streams of focused particles? Perhaps something far more exotic, controlled gravitational or plasma channels that our physics can only guess at? And the most important question, why? What was the purpose of this energy injection? What exactly was 3i Atlas doing to our ionosphere? Was it an attack, a scan, or something entirely different beyond our primitive concepts of hostility or curiosity? Perhaps it was some form of terraforming, or more precisely, geoengineering, a process of fine-tuning our atmosphere's parameters, changing its chemical composition, its conductivity, its response to cosmic radiation. We see only the side effect of this process, the beautiful, mysterious lights in the sky. Like natives who see only steam rising from the jungle, not understanding that it's a steam engine laying a railway through their forest. The triangle captured by the amateur astronomer was not just an anomaly, it was a signature that other observers, now knowing what to look for, began to find in old, archived data taken during previous close approaches of other strange objects. It turned out that the ghost in the machine was not alone. It had predecessors. And all this time, they had been leaving us their messages, burning them onto the dome of our sky, and we were too blind to read them. Until this night, when a piece of an impossible puzzle falls into your hands, there is an overwhelming temptation to consider it unique, one of a kind. The footage from the International Space Station was just such a piece. It showed something so alien and unprecedented that it seemed like a revelation, an isolated miracle. But the universe rarely creates unique specimens. Its fundamental language is one of patterns, repetitions, and fractals. What happens once has likely happened before, and will happen again. And if we haven't noticed it before, it's only because we didn't know what to look for. Armed with this new, shocking knowledge, I began not just to look, but to see. I began to connect the dots. not on a map of the world, but on a map of time, sifting through decades of scientific observations, technological failures, and forgotten anomalies in search of an echo, a shadow of what we saw on the night of the trickster event. And gradually, from disparate and seemingly unrelated events, a vast, terrifying picture began to emerge. This was not a random chain of coincidences. It was a meticulously constructed architecture, a conspiracy map drawn not with ink on paper, but with silence in archives, gaps in data, and light in the sky. The first node in this network, the first point on our map, was found in the most obvious place, in the history of the object 3I Atlas itself. When it was first discovered, astronomers, as is customary, began to search old archival sky surveys for its pre-coveries, traces of the object on photographs taken before its official discovery. This helps to refine the orbit and understand its past behavior. And they found them. A few faint, barely discernible dots on images taken by survey telescopes several years prior. But when I closely examined the dates and times of these pre-coveries, I noticed a strange correlation. Each of these dates, to within a few days, coincided with another, less massive, but still noticeable spike in reports of anomalous atmospheric phenomena. For example, in 2019, when 3I Atlas was still far beyond Jupiter's orbit, a wave of discussions about unusually bright and numerous noctilucent clouds, the highest clouds in Earth's atmosphere that sometimes glow after sunset, suddenly erupted on astronomy forums. There were several times more of them than usual, and they appeared at uncharacteristic latitudes. Official science linked this to increased humidity in the mesosphere. A coincidence? Perhaps. But let's move on. In 2021, as the object crossed Mars's orbit, several geostationary communication satellites over North America experienced a series of unexplained orientation glitches. The failure lasted only a few minutes and was written off as a software bug. On the very same day, civilian pilots over Canada reported en masse the appearance of the Steve phenomenon, that same purple ribbon. Another coincidence? These were just faint echoes, the first tentative activations of the mechanism. But the closer 3I Atlas got to the inner solar system, the more distinct and powerful these coincidences became. They transformed from scattered trickles of information into a single, powerful information cascade. 6 months before perihelion, an incident occurred that many probably remember. A global outage of the European Galileo navigation system. For 12 hours, the entire constellation of 30 satellites simply stopped transmitting correct navigation signals. Millions of devices worldwide lost their ability to determine their location. The official cause was cited as a failure in the ground-based equipment for calculating time corrections. A complex technical explanation that few understood but everyone accepted. But on the same night that engineers in Europe were desperately trying to reboot the system, radio astronomers in Australia, working with the ASCAP telescope, detected a powerful but very short radio burst. Its source was located somewhere in the ecliptic plane, and its dispersion, how the signal smears across frequencies as it passes through interplanetary plasma, indicated a distance that corresponded with frightening accuracy to the position of 3I Atlas at that moment. The Galileo outage, the radio burst, and, as the cherry on top, dozens of social media videos showing strange, pulsating elves, giant rings of light in the ionosphere over the southern Indian Ocean. All three events occurred within a single hour. This is no longer just a coincidence. This is choreography. But to fully grasp the scale of this choreography, you have to step back and look at older, almost mythical events in the history of space exploration. You have to resurrect from the archives that very artifact from the past that has haunted anomaly researchers for decades. August 15th, 1977. The Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University part of the CD project to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, detected something incredible. For 72 seconds, its receiver picked up a powerful, narrow-band radio signal on the hydrogen frequency, which seemed to come from the constellation Sagittarius. Astronomer Jerry Amon, reviewing the data printouts a few days later, was so stunned that he circled the corresponding sequence of characters with a red pen and wrote a single word in the margin. Wow! The wow signal became the holy grail for SETI enthusiasts. It had all the hallmarks of an artificial origin. But despite dozens of attempts, it was never detected again. It remained a singular, unexplained anomaly. Now let's do something that has never been done in official science. Let's superimpose the trajectory of 3I Atlas, calculated backward in time, onto a map of the starry sky. Where does it lead us? From what point in space did it begin its long journey to us? Its trajectory, accounting for margins of error, points not just to the constellation Sagittarius. It points to the very tiny patch of sky from which the wow signal is believed to have come. Imagine this scenario. What if the wow signal wasn't a message addressed to us? What if it was a marker, a navigational beacon, or perhaps an activation command sent to an automated probe that had been dormant in deep space for billions of years? A signal that told it, they have reached the necessary technological level. They are listening. It's time. And this probe, 3I Atlas, began its long, multi-year journey to the solar system. This scenario sounds like science fiction, but it elegantly connects the two most mysterious events in modern astronomy into a single, logical story. It gives us a motive. It gives us a timeline. And it forces us to reconsider everything we thought about the great silence of space. What if the silence is not an absence of intelligence, but just a very, very long wait? A wait until we are ready. Or until we become interesting enough to study. Or for something else. This map, this chronology, connecting noctilucent clouds, satellite failures, radio bursts, the wow signal, and finally, the global light show, pointed to one thing. We are not dealing with a random visit from an interstellar iceberg. We are witnessing the final phase of a long, meticulously planned operation. And as I continued to dig, I realized that the threads of this conspiracy, or if you will, this plan, led to one completely unexpected place. Not to NASA, not to secret military bases, but to the quiet, respectable offices of a little-known committee at the United Nations. The United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Officially, this organization deals with the development of international space law. But a few months before the arrival of 3I Atlas, they, in a closed session, without any public announcement, made radical changes to one of their oldest and most controversial documents, the so-called Post-Detection Policy and Procedure. And the new version of this protocol, according to rumors that leaked onto several specialized forums, contained one new frightening clause. A clause that recommended all member states in the event of confirmed contact to remain silent. A complete, coordinated, global information embargo. Until further notice. They knew. They were preparing. And when the lights ignited in the sky, they simply put their plan into action. The question that inevitably arises at any point in any investigation, when the facts start to form a picture that is too uncomfortable, is the question of motive. Cui bono? Who benefits? It is a formula as old as time. A razor's edge that separates coincidence from intent. To apply it to the actions of giant, impersonal bureaucratic machines like NASA or governments seems like the height of paranoia. We are accustomed to believing that these institutions, for all their flaws, act for the greater good, guided by science and reason. The idea of a global, coordinated cover-up of a truth of planetary scale seems like the plot of a cheap thriller, not a reality of the 21st century. But that's only because we judge them by our own human standards. To understand their logic, you have to stop thinking like a citizen and start thinking like the system. And for the system, as a self-sustaining organism whose primary goal is to maintain stability in its own existence, concealing information about an event like the visit of 3I Atlas is not just one of the possible courses of action. It is the only possible, absolutely logical, and rational choice. The first, most obvious, and if you will, most humane motive is the prevention of panic. We like to think of ourselves, of humanity in the year 2025, as an enlightened, rational species. We watch movies about alien contact and imagine how we would greet the news with dignity and curiosity. This is a comforting illusion. The reality would more likely resemble a scene from an apocalyptic blockbuster filmed on a handheld camera. Imagine the morning after every news channel in the world showed that very image from the ISS, thin energy threads stretching from an alien artifact to our planet. What would happen in the next minute? The next hour? The next day? The first thing to collapse would be the global financial system. This is not a guess. It's a guarantee. Markets are not mathematics. They are psychology, built on the predictability of the future. The news that an unknown force is actively and purposefully influencing our atmosphere would nullify the very concept of predictability. The Dow Jones Industrial Average would plummet thousands of points in the first minute of trading before automated systems simply shut down the exchange. Panic, like a digital virus, would instantly spread to Tokyo, London, Shanghai. The global economy, this most complex web of mutual obligations, would evaporate in an instant. But that would only be the beginning. Social chaos would follow. Imagine lines at gas stations stretching for miles, empty supermarket shelves, power outages in entire cities due to overloaded grids and a mass exodus of the population. Remember how the world behaved at the beginning of the pandemic over an invisible virus. Now multiply that panic by 1,000, because the threat is now not just invisible, it is incomprehensible. Religious cults that have been predicting the end of the world for centuries would receive the most compelling proof of their claims. Millions of people would take to the streets, some to pray, others to loot. Governments would declare a state of emergency, but it would be too late. The very fabric of the social contract, based on the belief that the system is in control, would be torn to shreds. Recall Orson Welles' famous War of the Worlds radio broadcast in 1938. Thousands of people, hearing a dramatized report of a Martian invasion on the radio, believed it and succumbed to panic, even though it was just fiction. Now imagine that the evidence is real and irrefutable. From the perspective of the system, which views society not as a collection of free individuals, but as a complex system to be kept in equilibrium, allowing such a scenario is tantamount to suicide. And the lie, the big, calming lie about a solar storm, becomes not an immoral act, but an act of supreme state pragmatism. It is the bitter medicine given to a patient to prevent them from dying of shock while the doctors try to figure out what is actually wrong. They hid the truth not out of malice, but out of fear of us. Out of fear of our fragile, irrational nature. But there is a second, much darker and more cynical motive. A motive that has nothing to do with concern for our well-being. It is the motive of national security and technological superiority. Let's forget about panic for a moment and look at the situation through the eyes of a military strategist or an intelligence chief. What is 3I Atlas? It is not just an astronomical object. It is, with a high degree of probability, a sample of extraterrestrial technology, orders of magnitude superior to anything we can imagine. Technology capable of crossing interstellar space. Technology capable of purposefully manipulating a planetary atmosphere from a distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers. Whoever first understands the principles of its operation, Whoever can replicate them will gain not just an advantage, they will gain absolute, indisputable power over the rest of the world. This is the ultimate prize in human history, and a struggle will be fought for it. Quiet, invisible, but absolutely merciless. If information about the nature of 3I Atlas became public knowledge, the most insane arms race in history would immediately begin. Every country with a space program would send its probes to the object. Every intelligence agency in the world would try to steal data from its competitors. The world, already on the brink, would be plunged into a new Cold War. But this time, the stake would not be the nuclear button, but the key to technological omnipotence. From this perspective, the cover-up is not just a way to avoid panic. It is a strategic necessity. It is an attempt to maintain the status quo, to prevent the destabilization of the geopolitical balance. And, even more importantly, it gives the group that first realized the scale of the event, in this case, probably the United States and its closest allies, a colossal head start. While the whole world discusses a fabricated solar storm, they, behind closed doors, are already analyzing the data obtained. The best minds from secret research centers like DARPA or Lincoln Laboratory are already working to unravel the physics of the energy threads. They are trying to understand how it works, to learn to do the same, or at the very least, to learn how to defend against it. To believe in the reality of such a scenario, you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. You just need to know history. Remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964? The U.S. government claimed that its destroyer, the USS Maddox, had been attacked without provocation by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. Based on this incident, Congress passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which gave the president the authority to begin full-scale combat operations in Vietnam. Years later, it was revealed that the second, decisive attack most likely never happened. It was phantom targets on radar, misinterpreted by operators. But the narrative was created. The goal was achieved. The system lied to get a carte blanche for war. And now recall Project MKUltra. For decades, the CIA conducted secret, illegal experiments on its own citizens, trying to develop methods of mind control. People were drugged with LSD without their knowledge, subjected to psychological torture. All of this was done in sterile offices, documented in reports stamped top secret, and justified by the need to counter the Soviet Union. These examples are not anomalies. They are demonstrations of how the system operates under an existential threat, real or imagined. It is willing to lie. It is willing to break its own laws. It is willing to make any sacrifice to maintain control. And the news of 3I Atlas's arrival is the greatest existential threat of all. Thus, the cover-up becomes not just logical. It becomes inevitable. It is dictated by both the fear of chaos and the thirst for power. It is a perfect storm of motives that makes silence the only possible strategy. They place the truth in an information quarantine. Like a deadly virus, it was isolated from society until the best doctors of the system in secret laboratories could develop a vaccine, a way to control it, use it, or defend against it. But here, in this seemingly exhaustive logic, lies the most disturbing conclusion. The thought arises that the cover-up may not be aimed at protecting society or even at preparing for a struggle with other nations for the technological prize. Perhaps it is aimed at preparing for something without our knowledge. They hid the truth not to protect us from panic. They hid it to buy time. Time to prepare a response. A response we will never be told about. A response they will prepare in complete silence while we gaze at the beautiful lights in the sky, unaware that above our heads, the first scene of the last war, or the last alliance in human history, is already unfolding. After the motives of the system become clear, the investigation inevitably returns to its source, to the epicenter of the mystery, to the object 3I Atlas itself. For a long time, we looked at it through the lens of official science, seeing only a passive anomaly, a natural curiosity. We discussed its strange orbit, its unusual composition, its unpredictable brightness. But now, armed with the knowledge of its true behavior, we can conduct a completely different analysis. Not the anatomy of a dead rock, but the autopsy of a living, functioning mechanism. We must stop asking, what is it? And start asking, how does it work? The ISS footage showing the energy threads became the Rosetta Stone that finally allows us to begin deciphering this unearthly language. And the first thing that strikes you upon a new, close look at all the data collected on 3I Atlas is that its properties are absolutely incompatible with the idea of a natural origin. Every one of its characteristics that once seemed merely strange now looks like a perfectly designed element of a complex engineering structure. Let's start with the most fundamental, its trajectory. As we've already said, it was hyperbolic, with an eccentricity indicating an interstellar origin. But there is another, much more subtle orbital parameter, inclination. This is the angle between the object's orbital plane and the ecliptic plane, in which the planets of the solar system rotate. For most objects coming from the Oort cloud, this angle is random. They can arrive from any direction. But 3I Atlas was moving almost exactly in the ecliptic plane. Its inclination was less than 1 degree. The probability of such a coincidence for a random interstellar visitor is infinitesimally small. It's like throwing a needle from space and having it land precisely in the groove of a vinyl record. But from an engineering standpoint, such a choice of trajectory is perfectly logical. By moving in the ecliptic plane, the probe could use the gravitational fields of the giant planets, like Jupiter, to make precise and efficient course correction maneuvers. It wasn't just flying through the system, it was navigating it, using it like a ready-made transportation network. Its path was not a random fall, but a calculated route. But the most astonishing thing is what happened during its perihelion passage. Any comet, as it approaches the Sun, experiences so-called non-gravitational acceleration. The jets of gas and dust erupting from its nucleus act like small rocket engines, gently pushing it and altering its orbit. This effect is well studied and predictable. 3I Atlas also demonstrated non-gravitational acceleration, but it was wrong. First, it was too strong for an object that showed almost no visible outgassing. There was no coma or tail that could explain such thrust. Second, and most importantly, the vector of this acceleration was directed not away from the Sun, as is the case with comets, but perpendicular to the solar wind. It wasn't just accelerating, it was actively maneuvering. It was using the Sun's energy to correct its trajectory after the main event. It was like a sailboat using a crosswind to move at an angle to it. This behavior is so far outside of everything we know about orbital mechanics that official science simply chose not to comment on it. But in the context of our investigation, the explanation is self-evident. 3I Atlas is not just a rock, it is a solar sail. Or to be more precise, some form of solar-powered machine capable of converting the star's energy not just into heat, but into directed momentum. Now let's turn to its composition. Spectral analysis, conducted from a great distance, showed the presence of silicates and complex carbon compounds, which is typical for asteroids. But as the object got closer and could be studied with more powerful instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope, the picture became much stranger. The surface of 3I Atlas reflected light in very narrow specific bands of the infrared and ultraviolet spectrum. This did not look like a uniform natural material. It looked like a mosaic of different substances, each optimized to interact with a specific wavelength of solar radiation. Some areas almost completely absorbed energy, while others almost completely reflected it. Its surface wasn't geology. It was optics. A giant, complex optical system the size of a continent. Moreover, detailed analysis of the spectral lines revealed traces of rare earth metals such as yttrium and terbium in concentrations not found in nature. On Earth, these elements are used in the production of high-tech magnets, lasers, and superconductors. Their presence on the surface of an interstellar object in such quantities is not just an anomaly. It is direct evidence pointing to an industrial origin. It's like finding a microchip in Antarctic ice. You can talk all you want about random meteorites, but the simplest explanation is that someone made it. And finally, the most important part, the energy mechanism. How did 3i Atlas generate those threads? Where did it get the energy for such a colossal discharge? The answer most likely lies in its interaction with the sun at the moment of perihelion. Let's imagine 3i Atlas not as a solid body, but as a complex, multi-layered structure. Its outer shell, composed of these optically active materials, works like a giant concentrator. It collects solar radiation from across its vast surface and focuses it on an inner core. What is in this core? We can only guess. Perhaps it's some kind of superconducting energy storage device. Or maybe some exotic physical process that our science has yet to discover is taking place there. For example, the direct conversion of photons into coherent plasma. When the level of stored energy reaches a critical point, the system discharges. It emits those very filaments, focused beams of energy that we saw in the images from the ISS. The entire object works like a giant capacitor, charged by the sun and discharged into Earth's atmosphere. This explains why the event was so brief and why it occurred precisely at the point of maximum proximity to the star. It was not a side effect of heating. It was an operational cycle. Based on all this data, we can finally formulate a direct, albeit hypothetical, hypothesis about the artificial origin of 3i Atlas. It is an automated, unmanned interstellar probe sent by an unknown civilization to perform a specific task. Its design is brilliant in its efficiency. It uses gravitational fields for navigation and starlight as a power source. Its body is simultaneously a shield from the space environment, a complex optical instrument, and a propulsion system. It is not just a ship. It is a self-sufficient ecosystem, perfectly adapted for a long journey and active work in a foreign star system. And now that we understand how it does what it does, we can return to the most frightening question. Why? If this is geoengineering, what is its ultimate goal? They are changing our atmosphere. But into what? Perhaps they are preparing it for the arrival of their creators, making it more suitable for their form of life. Or conversely, they are making it less suitable for ours, slowly and imperceptibly poisoning our world. Or maybe the goal is not the atmosphere itself. Maybe the ionosphere is just the medium, the antenna through which they influence something else, the planet itself, its magnetic field, or us, our consciousness. We don't know. But one detail discovered in recent days hints that the answer may be even more terrifying than we thought. After performing its maneuver near the sun, 3i Atlas changed its trajectory. And this new trajectory, calculated by independent astronomers, pointed to something completely illogical. It was not flying away from the solar system on a hyperbolic orbit, as it should have. Instead, it settled into a very elongated, but still closed, elliptical orbit. An orbit that, in a few decades, will bring it back again, into the inner part of the system. But the strangest thing was not that. It was where it was heading now, on the far leg of its new loop. Its trajectory was not leading simply into the void. It was leading directly to the Kuiper Belt, to one of its largest and most mysterious objects, the dwarf planet Sedna, whose own incredibly elongated and strange route around the sun still has no universally accepted explanation. Its trajectory was not leading away from the system. It was leading towards something towards something that was already waiting for it here. There comes a point in any investigation when the accumulated evidence weaves together into a picture so coherent and compelling that it begins to seem like the only possible reality. We have walked that path. We have demolished the official version of a solar storm, exposing its inconsistencies. We have uncovered the cover-up of data from the ISS, that architecture of silence built to hide an inconvenient truth. We have obtained irrefutable proof in the form of images of energy threads stretching from 3i Atlas to Earth. We have connected the dots on the map of time, linking the object's arrival to decades of strange anomalies, including the mythical "wow" signal. We have analyzed the motives of the system, understanding that concealment was not a choice for it, but a necessity. And finally, we have performed an autopsy on the object itself, proving that its every characteristic screams of an artificial technological origin. It seems the case is closed. The hypothesis has become a theory, almost a fact. We stand on the threshold of the greatest discovery in history, ready to announce to the world that we are not alone, and that first contact has already begun, albeit in a form we could not have imagined. And it is at this very moment, at the point of maximum certainty, that it is absolutely necessary to do what fanatics and true conspiracy theorists never do. We must stop. Take a deep breath. And with all possible impartiality, swing the pendulum of plausibility in the opposite direction. Let's forget everything we've learned for a moment. Let's don the mantle of the most hardened skeptic and try to construct an alternative, completely rational, and, as far as possible, boring explanation for everything we've observed. Let's give the floor to the very system we have so zealously accused and listen to its arguments. And we must admit that these arguments, when considered individually, sound quite compelling. Let's start with the main point, the official version of a cannibal solar storm. We claim that data from solar observatories like SOHO and SDO showed no signs of such an event, and that is true. But, as any heliophysicist from the Goddard Space Flight Center would argue, we were looking in the wrong place. There is a phenomenon known as a stealth CME, or a stealth coronal mass ejection. Sometimes, a plasma ejection can be so tenuous and have a temperature so close to that of the surrounding corona that it is virtually invisible in standard coronagraph images. It's like a submarine running in silent mode. We can only detect it by indirect signs, by the disturbance in the solar wind recorded by satellites already far from the sun, such as DSCOVR at the L1 Lagrange point. Let's imagine such a scenario. The sun did indeed produce two such stealth ejections. They were invisible to SOHO. They did not produce a bright flare that SDO could have seen, but they were there. They merged in transit, and they hit Earth. Could this have happened? Theoretically, yes. It's a rare, but not impossible event. And if we accept this hypothesis, then all our criticism of the official version begins to crumble. NASA was not lying. They were simply presenting the most probable, albeit difficult to verify model based on the data they received from solar wind sensors, not from cameras. Their silence and vague wording were not a sign of a cover-up, but a manifestation of scientific caution in the face of incomplete data. It was not a conspiracy, but business as usual. Okay, but what about the missing data from the ISS? That wall of 515 errors. A skeptic would find a rational explanation here too. When a powerful stream of charged particles from a coronal mass ejection hits the magnetosphere, it doesn't just cause auroras. It induces so-called geomagnetically induced currents. Essentially, the entire ionosphere becomes a giant electrical generator. These currents can induce electrical charges on long conductive objects, like power lines on Earth, or like the huge metallic structure of the International Space Station. It is quite possible that during this unprecedented geomagnetic storm, The station's hull accumulated such a massive static charge that it caused failures in the most sensitive electronics. For example, in the highly sensitive sensor of the camera on the Kibo module. This could have led to noise, artifacts, or actual sensor saturation, which the automated system quite correctly identified as an error. The perfect correlation between the gaps in the data and the anomalous auroras is also easily explained in this case. Both were caused by the same event, the impact of solar plasma on a specific section of the magnetosphere. There was no censorship. There was a common, albeit large-scale, technical failure caused by extreme space weather conditions. But what about our trump card? The images obtained from our oracle. Those impossible, perfect threads of light? Here, the skeptic's argument would be the harshest and most insulting. He would say that we have become victims of our own bias. We wanted to find proof so badly that we mistook what is most likely a common, well-known artifact for it. For example, a light pillar from a bright object, which occurs due to the reflection of light from ice crystals in the atmosphere, or in the telescope's own optics. Or even more likely, it was a data compression artifact, or an error in decoding. Our oracle sent us a raw telemetry packet and a script to decrypt it. What if there was a bug in that script? What if our computer, trying to piece together a corrupted or non-standardly encoded file, generated those perfect straight lines? Such things happen in digital image processing. It's not a ghost in the machine. It's just a bug in the code. And what about 3i Atlas itself? All its oddities can also be explained without resorting to the alien ship hypothesis. Its near-zero inclination? A rare but statistically possible coincidence. Its strange composition with rare earth metals. Perhaps it's just a fragment of the core of an exotic exploded planet where such elements were abundant. It's maneuvering near the sun. Perhaps it's the result of the uneven outgassing of invisible volatile substances like nitrogen or carbon monoxide, which create thrust but do not form a visible coma. For every mystery, for every anomaly we found, there is a counter-hypothesis, a natural, albeit improbable, explanation. And therein lies the power of the system. It doesn't need to prove its case. It only needs to sow doubt. It only needs to show that an alternative, non-fantastical explanation exists. And our brain, trained by Occam's razor to choose the simplest option, will most likely agree with it. A chain of incredible, but natural coincidences still seems more likely than the visit of a giant alien machine. And so, the pendulum has swung to its extreme. We are back in the world of rationality. We are back in a safe, predictable universe where everything can be explained by known laws of physics. It seems simple. An ordinary comet, an unusual but natural solar storm, a technical glitch on the ISS, and our own overactive imagination. Case closed. We can all go home. But there was something else. One detail. One single, tiny, but absolutely irrefutable piece of evidence that no skeptic, no NASA scientist, no proponent of natural explanations could explain. And this detail brings us back to the very first night, to the very first observation, to that thin, purple ribbon of light in the sky known as Steve. Steve, strong thermal emission velocity enhancement, is not an aurora. For a long time, scientists didn't understand what it was at all. Unlike auroras, which are caused by the bombardment of the atmosphere by particles, electrons and protons, Steve is simply a very hot, up to 3,000 degrees Celsius, about 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and very fast, up to 6 kilometers per second, over 13,000 miles per hour, stream of gas in the ionosphere. It doesn't glow on its own in the same way auroras do. It's simply incandescent plasma. Its violet hue is thermal radiation. But the most important thing about it is its spectrum. If you break down the light from an aurora into its components, you will see clear, bright emission lines of oxygen, green and red, and nitrogen, blue and violet. These are like fingerprints that unequivocally say, solar wind particles were here. But Steve doesn't have this. Its spectrum is almost continuous, like that of a red-hot piece of metal. There are no traces of particle bombardment. This means that whatever mechanism is heating this gas, it is not the solar wind. It is something else. Something that acts directly on the atmosphere itself, pumping energy directly into it. Official science still does not have a single accepted theory that explains Steve. But all existing models agree on one thing: it cannot be caused by the same processes as regular auroras. And here it is, the crushing blow to the solar storm version. Even if we assume the cannibal ejection existed, even if it was the most powerful in history, it could have caused any number of auroras. But it physically could not have created Steve. It's like trying to start a fire by pouring water on the wood. Wrong mechanism. And on the night of the Trickster event, Steve was observed all over the planet on an unprecedented scale. It was the centerpiece of the whole show, and its presence is the irrefutable, carved-in-stone evidence from the spectral data that on that night, some other non-solar force was acting on our atmosphere, a force capable of directly heating the ionosphere, a force that leaves behind completely different fingerprints, a force that perfectly matches what we saw in the images from the ISS, energy threads directly injecting energy into the gas. Steve is not just another anomaly. It is the signature of the true culprit left at the scene of the crime. And this signature completely shatters the alibi that the system so carefully constructed for itself. The pendulum has swung again, and this time, it's not coming back. When an irrefutable piece of evidence like the spectrum of the Steve phenomenon shatters the last line of defense of rational explanations, the investigation inevitably moves beyond a single specific event. The mystery of 3I Atlas ceases to be just an astronomical puzzle. It becomes a lens through which we are forced to re-examine our entire technological reality. We are used to thinking of progress as a linear, predictable process. We build ever more powerful telescopes to look deeper into space. We create ever more complex neural networks to analyze the data we receive. We launch more and more satellites to enmesh the planet in an invisible information web. In this worldview, technology is our faithful and obedient tool for understanding the universe. But what if that's not the case? What if the line between the tool and the object of study, between the observer and the observed, is becoming increasingly blurred? What if our own technologies, having reached a certain level of complexity, begin to generate their own anomalies, their own blind spots, which we mistake for natural phenomena? And what if someone else, far more advanced, has long been using this principle against us, turning our own technosphere into a shadow play, a giant system of mirrors concealing their true presence? Let's look at what's happening right now, here on Earth. In the last few years, a quiet revolution has been unfolding before our eyes, one that is little talked about outside of narrow specialist circles. Humanity has begun to actively create synthetic skies. This is not a metaphor. Take, for example, SpaceX's Starlink project. Tens of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit, intended to provide global internet access. A noble goal. But there is a side effect that astronomers around the world have warned about. These satellites reflect sunlight. They create moving streaks of light in the night sky that are already interfering with ground-based observatories, leaving bright scars on deep space images. For now, it's just an inconvenience. But imagine the next step. Imagine that thousands of these satellites are equipped not just with passive reflectors, but with steerable laser emitters, working as a single coordinated swarm, like a giant three-dimensional display. They could paint any image in the upper layers of the atmosphere. They could create artificial auroras over the equator. They could project giant advertising logos visible from anywhere on a continent. The technology for this, in essence, already exists. It's the Ionospheric Modification Project, better known by the name of one of its first facilities, HARP, in Alaska. Officially, these installations are used to study the ionosphere by pumping it with powerful radio emissions, but their potential is much broader. They can locally change the atmosphere's conductivity, create plasma lenses, and influence the propagation of radio waves. Now let's take another step into the realm of the most advanced research: quantum technologies. We are on the verge of creating a global quantum internet, a network secured against eavesdropping by the fundamental laws of physics. But the same quantum entanglement that allows for such networks also opens up fantastic possibilities. Imagine a network of thousands of microsatellites whose onboard quantum processors are in a state of entanglement. Such a network is no longer just a collection of individual devices. It becomes a single, global quantum sensor. It could detect gravitational waves with previously unattainable precision. It could detect minute changes in Earth's magnetic field. In essence, it could feel the space-time around the planet as a whole. The line between technology and magic begins to blur. We are learning to manipulate reality at its most fundamental levels. And here arises the key, disturbing question. If we, with our relatively primitive technological level, are already on the verge of creating such systems, why are we so certain that someone else, who has surpassed us in development by thousands or millions of years, hasn't already done so? What if the anomalous atmospheric phenomena we observe are not just a side effect of 3I Atlas's operation? What if they are the purposeful use of our own terrestrial technosphere as an instrument? Let's go back to the Trickster event. We saw not only Steve and sprites, we also saw global failures in satellite systems like Galileo. The official version states that these were unrelated events. But what if they are connected in the most direct way? What if the energy threads from 3I Atlas were directed not only at the atmosphere itself, but also at our satellite infrastructure? Imagine that these threads are not just hot beams. What if they are complex modulated signals? Information packets wrapped in energy. What if they briefly hacked our satellites, forcing them, our own devices, to generate the very radio emissions that created part of the light phenomena in the ionosphere? In that case, what we saw was a hybrid event. Part of it was caused by the direct impact of 3I Atlas, and part by the operation of our own, temporarily hijacked technology. We didn't just see a natural phenomenon. We saw a demonstration of power. A demonstration that our vaunted global nervous system, our technosphere, is completely defenseless against this level of influence. They can not only observe us, they can use our own eyes to show us what they want us to see. This hypothesis explains many oddities. For example, why the geography of the phenomena was so complex and seemingly chaotic. It didn't perfectly match the contact points of the threads we saw in the ISS images. It was much broader. Perhaps because 3I Atlas used our satellite constellation as a relay, as an amplifier, covering the entire planet with its influence. It also explains why the system was so frightened and why it tried so desperately to hide everything. It's one thing to admit that we are being affected by an incomprehensible external force. It's quite another to admit that our entire multi-trillion-dollar space infrastructure, the foundation of our defense, navigation, and communication, can be hijacked at any moment and used against us. This is an admission of complete and utter technological defeat. It's as if a 19th century army armed with muskets encountered a modern combat drone capable of hacking their telegraph lines and issuing false orders. The war would be lost before the first shot was fired. We are in a double blind spot. Our scientific models are not equipped to describe the physics of such phenomena, and our technological systems are not prepared to counter them. We are like the inhabitants of Plato's cave, who not only see shadows on the wall, but also proudly believe they built the fire that casts those shadows. And this leads us to the most unsettling conclusion. If someone is capable of this, if someone can use our technosphere like a musical instrument, playing a symphony of fear and wonder, then we must ask ourselves, what else that we consider ours is actually part of this game? Our neural networks that filter information for us, weeding out anomalies, our financial algorithms that sometimes behave so chaotically they cause market crashes, even our social networks, where the strangest ideas and moods sometimes emerge and spread with viral speed. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. But what if someone has long been using much more subtle illusions against us? What if we have been living inside someone else's experiment for a long time, not noticing its boundaries because those boundaries are built from our own familiar technologies? The mystery of 3i Atlas is perhaps not just a story about first contact. It's a story about an awakening, about the painful realization that the room we thought was the entire universe might actually be just someone's laboratory. And the light we see is not the light of stars, but just a light bulb that someone turns on and off at will. When an investigation reaches a point where not just individual theories, but the very foundations of a familiar worldview collapse, it inevitably moves from the realm of facts and evidence to the realm of existential questions. The mystery of 3i Atlas, having passed through stages of denial, analysis, and technological paranoia, ultimately brings us to the edge of a philosophical abyss. We are forced to look down into the dizzying void where fundamental questions float, questions that humanity has asked itself since it first looked up at the stars. Are we alone in the universe? What does it mean for our species, for our civilization, for each of us individually, if the answer to that question is no? And what if the form of this not aloneness turns out to be completely different from what we imagined in our wildest dreams and most terrifying nightmares? We are facing not just a scientific discovery. We are facing a mirror that reflects not only an alien, incomprehensible intelligence, but also all the fragility, all the naivety, and all the arrogance of our own existence. The central axis around which all our searches for extraterrestrial life have revolved has always been the Fermi paradox. Formulated in the mid-20th century by physicist Enrico Fermi, it sounds deceptively simple. If our Milky Way galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars, many of which likely have planets, and if life arose on even a tiny fraction of those planets, and on an even smaller fraction it became intelligent and technological, then over the billions of years of the galaxy's existence, these civilizations would have had more than enough time to colonize it from end to end. So why do we see no clear, irrefutable evidence of their activities? Where is everybody? This question has given rise to dozens of hypotheses, from optimistic to blood-curdling. The rare Earth hypothesis states that the conditions for the emergence of complex life are so rare that we may indeed be alone. The Great Filter hypothesis suggests that on the developmental path of any civilization lies some insurmountable barrier: nuclear war, ecological collapse, a pandemic that destroys it before it can reach for the stars. We have either already passed this filter, or it is still waiting for us. But there are darker, more unsettling explanations for the Great Silence. One of them is the dark forest hypothesis, popularized by science fiction author Cixin Liu. It views the universe not as an empty cradle, but as a dark forest full of hiding hunters. In this forest, the primary law of survival is to remain silent. Any civilization that carelessly reveals its location immediately becomes a target for other, more advanced and possibly hostile species, who will destroy it out of simple self-preservation to eliminate a potential competitor. In this model, the silence of space is not a sign of an absence of life. It is a sign of universal, paranoid fear. It is the deafening silence of a graveyard where only those who can perfectly pretend to be dead survive. For a long time, We, humanity, have behaved like a naive child lost in this forest, shouting at the top of our lungs to attract attention. We have sent radio messages into space like the Arecibo message. We have attached golden records to our probes, the Voyagers and Pioneers, with information about our location, our biology, our culture. We naively believed that anyone who found them would be as kind and curious as we are. And now, in light of what we have learned about 3i Atlas, we are forced to reconsider this picture. What if the Great Silence is something else entirely? What if it is not the silence of absence or the silence of fear, but the silence of observation? Imagine another model, the galactic preserve, or zoo hypothesis. In this hypothesis, advanced civilizations exist, but they deliberately conceal their presence from us, viewing Earth as a kind of nature reserve. They observe our development, study us, but do not interfere, following something akin to the Prime Directive from Star Trek. They are waiting for us to reach a certain level of maturity, technological, ethical, social, before making open contact. In this model, 3i Atlas is not a conqueror's ship or a harbinger of the apocalypse. It is simply a hidden camera, an automated, unmanned probe, one of many that are periodically updated or serviced during a flyby of our system. Its impact on our atmosphere is not an attack. It might have just been a calibration of its sensors, or downloading accumulated data, or even some form of inoculation. A fine-tuning of our planetary environment to protect us from some external threat we are not even aware of, like a burst of galactic cosmic rays. This hypothesis seems comforting. It transforms us from potential victims into objects of care. But even in it, there is something profoundly humiliating. It reduces all our human greatness, all our history, all our culture to the level of ants in an anthill, watched with interest by an entomologist. We cease to be the masters of our own destiny. We become an exhibit. And there is no guarantee that one day, the zookeepers won't decide that the experiment has reached a dead end, and it's time to shut it down. But there is a third, most complex, and perhaps most realistic model, which stems from the behavior of 3i Atlas itself. This is the model of contact through artifact. In it, intelligent civilizations do not travel between the stars themselves or engage in direct dialogue. It's too long, too expensive, and too dangerous. Instead, they fill the galaxy with von Neumann probes, self-replicating machines that travel from system to system, gather resources, create copies of themselves, and continue their expansion. Their goal is not colonization, but knowledge. They are the galactic internet, a library, a neural network. 3i Atlas is one such node. It doesn't just observe, it actively interacts, but in a language we cannot yet understand. Its impact on our atmosphere is not an attack or a calibration. It is an attempt at dialogue. Imagine the ionosphere as a giant screen and the energy threads as a writing instrument. Perhaps those complex fractal patterns of light we saw were not just a side effect. Perhaps they were the message itself. Complex mathematical or physical information encoded in the form of plasma structures. We were looking at letters without understanding that it was an alphabet. We were like a dog watching a television screen, seeing moving pictures but unable to comprehend the plot of the movie. In this model, our task is not to hide or wait to be called. Our task is to learn, to decipher, to understand the rules of this new, non-human semiotics. Perhaps in these light patterns lie the answers to all our questions, from the mystery of dark energy to the cure for cancer. Perhaps it is an invitation to join the Galactic Club, but this is also the greatest challenge, because once we start this dialogue, we can't stop it. We will declare ourselves not just as a biological species, but as an equal interlocutor, and that could have unpredictable consequences. Each of these hypotheses, the dark forest, the preserve, the galactic internet, forces us to look at ourselves anew. It calls into question our central role in the universe. But perhaps the most disturbing conclusion is not which of them is correct, but that the answer may be far stranger and more incomprehensible. We tried to understand the motives of 3i Atlas based on our own concepts of life, intelligence, purpose. But what if it is something entirely different? Not the creation of a biological civilization, but, for example, the product of a planetary-scale artificial intelligence that has existed for billions of years. Or not a creation at all, but a form of natural yet non-biological life, born in the plasma clouds around a young star. Its goals may be as incomprehensible to us as a human's goals are to the bacteria living in their gut. We see geoengineering and think of colonization or terraforming, but for it might just be breathing, or feeding, or a process of reproduction. Perhaps the silence of space is not an absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors paid to the dead. Or perhaps it is just noise that we have not yet learned to listen to. And 3i Atlas is the first note in a symphony for which we have neither the ear nor the score to understand. After plunging into the dizzying abyss of philosophical speculation, any investigation must return to solid ground. From existential questions about our place in the universe, to concrete, verifiable facts and upcoming events. An abstract threat or hope must acquire a clear time frame, become a point on the calendar, an event to be awaited, to be prepared for. Otherwise, the investigation risks drowning in mysticism, turning into a set of beautiful but fruitless hypotheses. Fortunately, in the story of 3i Atlas, there is such a point. After its gravitational maneuver near the sun and its brief but intense conversation with our atmosphere, the object, as we now know, did not leave the solar system. It transitioned to a new, stable, elliptical orbit. And this orbit is not just a mathematical abstraction. It's a schedule. It's a roadmap of its future actions. By studying it, we can predict with high accuracy where it will be in the coming years and decades. And most importantly, we can identify the next moment of truth, the next event that will either confirm our wildest theories or completely debunk them. This moment of truth has a specific name. It is the Hera mission. The Hera mission is a real, non-fictional project of the European Space Agency. Officially, it is humanity's first ever planetary defense mission. Its target is the binary asteroid Didymos and its small moon, Dimorphos. A few years ago, as part of a NASA mission called DART, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, a small kamikaze spacecraft crashed into the smaller of the two asteroids, Dimorphos. The impact was successful. It changed Dimorphos's orbital period around Didymos by a full 33 minutes, proving that humanity is, in principle, capable of altering the trajectory of near-Earth objects. Now, Hera is en route to this system. Its task is to arrive at the asteroids in a few years, enter orbit around them, and conduct a detailed investigation of the impact's aftermath. It will study the crater left by the DART spacecraft, precisely measure the mass and composition of Dimorphos, and analyze the ejected material. This is fundamental science at its best. It is our first step toward becoming active architects of our own safety in the solar system. At least, that's the official story. But now let's look at this mission through the lens of our investigation. Hera's launch is scheduled for late 2026. Its journey to the Didymos system will take about 2 years. It will arrive at its destination in late 2028. Now let's superimpose the new calculated orbit of 3i Atlas onto this timeline. After its perihelion passage, it began its long journey to the outer solar system towards the Kuiper Belt. Its path takes it through the asteroid belt, the region between Mars and Jupiter, where the Didymos Dimorphos system is located. According to calculations, 3i Atlas will pass at a minimal but still safe distance from this binary asteroid system in late 2028. The timing is a near-perfect match, with an accuracy of a few weeks. Two of the most high-tech objects, one ours, one alien, will be in the same tiny patch of space, hundreds of millions of kilometers from Earth, at almost the same time. Can this be written off as mere coincidence? Perhaps. The asteroid belt is vast, but it has its highways, the most convenient trajectories for flight. But there are other, far more disturbing details. Initially, the Hera mission was planned very differently. In its first concept, it was supposed to fly to the asteroids along with the DART spacecraft to observe the collision in real time. But due to budget cuts and political disagreements, the Europeans pulled out of the project. NASA sent its impactor probe alone. And only a few years later, after DART's success, the Hera project was suddenly revived, received generous funding, and was fast-tracked. The official reason: the stunning success of the DART mission, which convinced politicians of the importance of planetary defense. But what if the real reason was different? What if, at the moment the new elliptical orbit of 3I Atlas was calculated, someone in the high offices of ESA and NASA realized what a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity had presented itself? They can't send a dedicated mission to 3I Atlas itself. That would be too obvious. It would be a directed mission that they know its true nature. It would raise questions they are not prepared to answer. But they can send a mission to an ordinary asteroid that, by pure coincidence, happens to be in the immediate vicinity of the mysterious interstellar visitor at the right time. The Hera mission is the perfect cover. It is our first disguised reconnaissance probe, sent for a rendezvous with the alien. What exactly do they hope to see there? Hera's main scientific instruments are a high-precision camera, a LiDAR for creating a 3D map of the surface, and a spectrometer. Officially, they will be aimed at Dimorphos. But nothing prevents the mission operators at the right moment from accidentally turning the spacecraft and pointing its cameras at the passing 3I Atlas. From that distance, they won't be able to make out details of its surface. But they will be able to do something much more important. They will be able to perform a highly accurate spectral analysis of its coma, if one appears. They will be able to detect any radio or plasma emissions. They will be able to see if it interacts in any way with the Didymos-Dimorphos system. They might even be able to see those same energy threads in action. In essence, Hera is our spy, our ambush set at a crossroads of cosmic highways. And this explains why two small CubeSats were included in the mission at the last minute. One of them, Juventus, is equipped with a low-frequency radar capable of seeing through the asteroid. Officially, to study its internal structure. But the same radar is the perfect tool for analyzing plasma clouds and energy fields around another, far more interesting object. We are entering a phase of long, tense waiting. For the next few years, nothing will happen on the surface. The world will forget about the strange lights in the sky. 3I Atlas will fade into a faint, dying point of light, visible only in the most powerful telescopes. The system will pretend that everything has returned to normal. But behind the scenes, a titanic, invisible work will be underway. Engineers in Darmstadt will be preparing Hera for launch, perhaps inserting secret protocols into its software that will never be mentioned in official documents. Analysts in secret centers will be building ever more accurate models of 3I Atlas's trajectory, trying to anticipate its every move. The countdown to late 2028 has begun. This will be our next moment of truth, and the stakes in this game are incredibly high. If Hera discovers nothing, if 3I Atlas flies past like an ordinary lifeless rock, our entire theory will collapse. It will mean we have fallen victim to a grand apophenia, a cognitive bias that makes us see connections where none exist. But if Hera sees something, if it detects even a shadow of what we saw in the images from the ISS, it will become irrefutable proof. But there is a third, most alarming possibility. What if the system is already preparing for this event and will again try to control the information? What if, at the crucial moment, we hear a message about a sudden communication failure with the Hera spacecraft, or receive a report that its cameras were blinded by a solar flare? Silence, as we already know, is also an answer. And if, at the end of 2028, our spy in deep space suddenly goes silent, we will know that it saw something we were not meant to see. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be very different. This is not just a scientific mission. This is our first attempt to look into the abyss, and we must be prepared for the abyss to look back. In any story of global conspiracies and impersonal, all-powerful systems, there is a danger of losing sight of the human scale. The investigation risks becoming a dry, abstract diagram, a chess game played by invisible pieces on a board the size of the solar system. But the truth is that at the heart of any discovery, any breakthrough, and any act of resistance, there are always specific people. Not institutions or algorithms, but living, breathing human beings with their fears, hopes, and most importantly, their unyielding curiosity. These are the seekers, the decentralized, self-organizing network of enthusiasts who are waging this information war. They are the Davids fighting the Goliath of the official narrative, armed not with a sling and a stone, but with backyard telescopes, open-source databases, and the power of distributed computing. And to fully understand the depth and drama of this confrontation, we must shift our focus for a moment from the cosmic objects to those who observe them. We must tell their stories. One of the central nodes of this underground network is a man known on specialized forums by the nickname Comet Chaser, and in real life as Chris Green. Chris is not a professional astronomer. By day, he works as a systems administrator for a small IT company in Arizona. But at night, he becomes a hunter. His weapon is a 20-inch reflector telescope that he built himself in his backyard. His hunting grounds are the dark, light pollution-free skies of the Sonoran Desert. For 20 years, Chris did what official science considers routine, almost thankless work. He patrolled the sky in search of new comets and asteroids. Over the years, he discovered 3 previously unknown comets and several dozen asteroids, earning modest respect in the community. He was one of those thousands of invisible soldiers of citizen science who silently and painstakingly fill in the gaps in our maps of the solar system. But everything changed with the arrival of 3I Atlas. This object was unlike anything Chris had ever seen, and he began to observe it with an obsession that only true enthusiasts are capable of. He spent every clear night at his telescope, taking hundreds of images, measuring the object's brightness, its color, trying to catch the slightest changes. It was Chris who was one of the first to notice that the brightness of 3I Atlas was changing unpredictably, not following the laws of rotation of an ordinary asteroid. He published his data on a forum, but the professional community ignored it, dismissing it as calibration errors of amateur equipment. But Chris didn't give up. He continued to collect data. On the night of the Trickster event, as the sky above him burned with violet and green, he, unlike millions of others, did not point his telescope at the celestial show. He aimed it at the faint, inconspicuous dot that he intuitively felt was the true source of what was happening, and he saw what he wasn't supposed to see. For a fraction of a second, in a single frame out of 1,000, the object flared. But it wasn't just a flash. A perfect, geometrically regular triangular halo formed around it for an instant. It was so strange, so wrong from a physics perspective, that Chris initially thought it was an optical defect. He checked everything: the alignment of the mirrors, the camera's operation, the software, everything was in perfect order. Then he realized he had captured something real. He published the image. The reaction was predictable. He was ridiculed. He was accused of forgery, of using Photoshop. Even his friends on the forum advised him not to chase cheap sensationalism. But Chris stood his ground. He made all the raw files, all the telemetry from his equipment publicly available, inviting anyone to verify his data. And that became the catalyst. Dozens of other seekers around the world, programmers, engineers, data analysts, downloaded his archive and began their own investigation. They wrote independent algorithms to process his images. They compared his data with data from other observers. And they came to a conclusion. The image was authentic. The triangle was real, and it was the signature, the very pattern that they later began to find in other, older data. Chris Green transformed from a simple amateur into an oracle, a man who, through his persistence and refusal to accept easy answers, made the first crack in the wall of silence. He became a symbol of the power of an independent perspective. Another key figure in this story was a woman whose name we cannot reveal at her request. Let's call her Elena. Elena is not an astronomer or a programmer. She is a linguist and historian, a specialist in ancient texts, working at a European university. Her involvement in the investigation began entirely by accident. She stumbled upon an online discussion about the WOW signal and its possible connection to the trajectory of 3I Atlas. Being a natural skeptic, she decided to test this hypothesis from the perspective of her own discipline. She began to search historical chronicles, myths, and legends of different peoples for mentions of strange celestial phenomena that could correlate with previous, hypothetical passages of similar objects through the solar system in the distant past. It was work on the borderline between science and madness. She sifted through Sumerian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian papyri, medieval European manuscripts, and she found something astonishing. In many cultures, separated by thousands of kilometers and thousands of years, she discovered a recurring motif, the myth of the celestial weaver or the star spiderweb. In some cultures, it was a deity who weaves the fates of men from threads of starlight. In others, it was a demonic creature that catches souls in its celestial nets. But the details of the descriptions were frighteningly similar. They always spoke of nights when thin, glowing ropes appeared in the sky, stretching from one bright, wandering star to the earth, and after which great changes occurred in the world: floods, droughts, the fall of empires, or the birth of prophets. Previously, historians had considered these myths to be mere poetic metaphors, but Elena, by cross-referencing the dates described in these texts with the orbit of 3I Atlas and other similar strange objects calculated back for centuries, discovered a chilling correlation. The peaks of mentions of the celestial web coincided with their moments of perihelion. She realized that our ancestors, without telescopes and spectrometers, had seen the same thing we had. They had seen these energy threads. But, lacking the scientific language to describe them, they cloaked their experience in the only form available to them, in the form of myth. Elena's work transformed 3I Atlas from a modern anomaly into an eternal, recurring phenomenon, woven into the very fabric of human history. She showed that they had always been here, but their work did not go unnoticed. The system, though large and unwieldy, has very sensitive nerve endings. Shortly after publishing his findings, Chris Green began to receive strange messages. First, it was anonymous threats on forums. Then, strange phone calls with silence on the other end. One night, someone hacked his computer and deleted his entire archive of observations of 3I Atlas. Fortunately, he had backups, but it was a clear signal. Stop digging. Elena faced a different, more subtle kind of pressure. Her academic advisor suddenly advised her to stop dabbling in pseudoscience and focus on her main dissertation. Her application for a grant for further research was rejected without explanation. They weren't trying to intimidate her, but to discredit her, to marginalize her, to push her to the fringes of the academic world. This is a classic tactic of the system. It doesn't kill its opponents. It makes them ridiculous. It strips them of their voice and authority. But these attempts at pressure had the opposite effect. They united the community of seekers. They realized that if the system was trying so actively to stop them, it meant they were on the right track. They created encrypted communication channels, began duplicating their data on dozens of servers around the world. From a group of scattered enthusiasts, they transformed into a true underground intelligence agency. Their struggle is not just a search for truth. It is a fight for the right to know, for the right to look at the sky and see it as it is, not as they want us to see it. And in this fight, each of them, whether an IT guy from Arizona or a historian from Europe, is an indispensable soldier on the front line of the greatest battle in human history, the battle for reality. Every long journey, whether a space flight or an intellectual investigation, has a way of coming full circle. After navigating the labyrinths of evidence, hypotheses, philosophical chasms, and human stories, we inevitably return to our starting point, to the very first event that set the entire chain in motion. We return to the night of October 27th to the 28th, 2025. But it's not the same perspective. When we first looked at the trickster event, we were like someone seeing only ripples on the surface of a pond. We saw chaos. We saw a collection of beautiful but disjointed and frightening anomalies. Now, armed with all our accumulated knowledge, we can look through that surface and see the underlying current, see the logic, see the mechanism. And what once seemed like a random glitch in the matrix of nature now appears to us as a perfectly planned, flawlessly executed, and multi-layered operation. And only now are we beginning to truly understand what happened that night. Let's reconstruct the events once more, step by step, but this time, not as observers, but as analysts who know the backstory. The first thing we must realize is that the operation began long before the first lights ignited in the sky. It began in cyberspace. We spoke of the global outages of satellite and cloud systems that coincidentally occurred at the same time as the main event. Now we can state with almost complete certainty, this was not a coincidence. This was the first stage, the blinding stage. Imagine a surgeon who, before starting a complex operation, administers anesthesia to the patient and covers the surgical field with sterile drapes, leaving only a tiny area exposed. 3i Atlas, or whoever controls it, did the exact same thing to our planet. Its first, barely perceptible energy wave was aimed not at the atmosphere, but at our technosphere. It was not a crude strike, but a delicate surgical pulse. Perhaps it was a narrowly focused electromagnetic pulse or a data stream disguised as cosmic radiation. Its targets were the most vulnerable nodes of our global nervous system, the outage of the European Galileo navigation system, the brief interruptions in the operation of several key Amazon Web Services data centers in Northern Virginia, which led to a cascade of failures in thousands of online services, the solar glare that blinded the radars of the U.S. Space Force's space surveillance system for several critical minutes. Each of these events, taken individually, look like an annoying but explainable technical glitch. But together, they form a single picture. It was a deliberate creation of blind spots. They temporarily disabled the very systems that could have detected their actions at the earliest stage and raised the alarm. They deprived us of some of our eyes and ears for precisely the amount of time needed to carry out the main phase of the operation. This was not just a show of force. It was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority and a deep understanding of our civilization's architecture. They knew where to strike, and only after the patient was sedated did the operation itself begin. At 3 hours and 11 minutes, Universal Time 3I Atlas, having reached perihelion, released its main energy charge. We now know that these were not just beams, but thousands of the finest steerable filaments. And here we see the second level of brilliant planning. The impact was not uniform, it was differentiated. Some of these threads, the most powerful ones, were directed at specific key points in the ionosphere. These were the points where their impact caused the most spectacular and most incorrect phenomena from the perspective of terrestrial physics. They were the ones that generated the giant, structured light grids over the Pacific and the long, stable ribbons of Steve over India and South America. This was shock therapy. Its purpose was to create visual noise, to overload our perceptual channels with something so strange and massive that it would cause stupor and bewilderment. It was a smokescreen, but one woven not from smoke, but from pure astonishment. But simultaneously, another, much more numerous but far weaker portion of the energy threads operated on a completely different principle. They did not create anomalies. On the contrary, they mimicked well-known natural phenomena. These finer streams of energy were directed towards the polar regions. They were specially tuned so that, when interacting with the ionosphere, they would cause a glow whose spectrum would be as similar as possible to that of a regular aurora. They created fake auroras. This was the second, more subtle line of deception. Its purpose was to give the system a plausible, albeit false, explanation. When NASA scientists began to analyze the data, they saw exactly what they were supposed to see according to their solar storm model: powerful activity in the polar ovals. This pushed them in the right direction, made them cling to the only natural explanation they had, and ignore the stranger data coming from lower latitudes. 3I Atlas didn't just carry out its operation, it simultaneously created the perfect cover for it, playing on our expectations and the limitations of our models. It showed us exactly the picture we were ready and wanted to see. And finally, the third, deepest, and most disturbing level of this operation. Why was all this necessary? What was the true goal, hidden behind this multi-layered spectacle of technological failures, shocking anomalies, and fake auroras? The answer, most likely, is that all these visible effects were just byproducts, just ripples on the water. The real action was happening in the depths. We still don't know exactly what 3I Atlas was doing to our atmosphere. Was it changing its chemical composition? Was it creating stable wave structures within it? Was it uploading some kind of information into it? But now, looking at the whole picture, we can propose one final, most shocking hypothesis: the outage of the AWS cloud services in Northern Virginia. It was always considered the least significant of all the events that night, an annoying technical glitch that affected streaming services and social networks. But it is in Northern Virginia, in the so-called Data Center Alley, that the world's largest and most important hub of internet infrastructure is located. Up to 70% of all global internet traffic passes through it. It is the heart of the global network. And here it is, the final, shocking revelation that ties all the threads together. The AWS outage was not just a coincidence. It wasn't just part of the blinding. It was cover for the main objective. What if that subtle, surgical pulse that caused the outage wasn't just interference? What if it was an upload? What if 3I Atlas, using our own atmosphere as a giant transceiver antenna, at the very moment our systems were vulnerable, implanted something? A virus, an algorithm, a data packet, directly into the heart of our digital civilization? We were looking for traces of its impact in the sky. We were analyzing the light. But perhaps, all this time, we were looking in the wrong place. Perhaps the real Trojan horse was delivered not to the atmosphere but to our servers. And now it's there, dormant, waiting, studying us from the inside. And the light show in the sky, that whole grand spectacle, was just a planetary scale diversion. The greatest magic trick in history, which made everyone look up at the sky while the real trick was happening in the silence and darkness of machine rooms. What they were hiding wasn't in the images. It was in the signal itself. And that signal is already inside. It has become a part of us. When the final, most monstrous piece of the puzzle falls into place, the investigation ends. But instead of triumph and relief, a heavy, oppressive silence descends. It's a silence filled with the weight of knowledge that can neither be shared with the world nor forgotten. We, the Seekers, a handful of anonymous researchers scattered across the globe, have gone all the way. We connected the dots. We saw the choreography. We peeked behind the curtain of the greatest show in history. And now we possess what can only be described by one term: tragic knowledge. It's a knowledge that brings no power or authority. It brings only isolation and a vast, unbearable burden of responsibility. We see the strings pulling the puppets, but we ourselves remain puppets on the same stage, with the sole difference that we are now aware of our position. Imagine this feeling. You wake up in the morning, you look out the window. The world looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. People are rushing to work, cars are stuck in traffic, planes are flying in the sky. Everything is in its place. Everything is normal. But for you, it's not. You look at the blue sky and see not just an atmosphere, but a giant screen on which the next performance could begin at any moment. You look at your smartphone screen, at the news feed, and you see not just information, but a potential channel for alien influence, a battlefield where an invisible algorithm may already be waging its war for minds. You hear a news report about another unexplained glitch on the stock market or the sudden collapse of a major social network, and your heart sinks because you know that it might not be a glitch. It's a test. It's a calibration. It's the ghost in the machine, testing its capabilities, flexing its digital muscles. You live in the same world as everyone else, but at the same time, you live in a completely different parallel reality. A reality where humanity is no longer the only intelligent player on this planet. This knowledge creates an unbridgeable gap between you and the rest of the world. You can no longer participate in ordinary conversations. When your friends or colleagues discuss politics, climate change, or the economic crisis, you remain silent. Because you know, or at least suspect, that all these great dramas that concern people so much might just be shadows on the cave wall. Just distractions while the real, fundamental changes are happening on a level inaccessible to their perception. You try to speak, you try to hint, but your words sound like the ramblings of a madman. What if there's something more behind this? Don't you find this coincidence strange? At best, they will look at you with sympathy, as someone who's gotten carried away with conspiracy theories. At worst, with irritation. Because people don't want to know. The truth you carry is too heavy. It shatters their cozy, predictable worldview. It robs them of their sense of control. And they instinctively defend themselves against it, choosing blissful ignorance. And you are left alone. Alone with this knowledge. Your only solace is communication with others like you, with other seekers in encrypted chats. You share new scraps of information, new suspicions. Watching the fading point of light that is 3i Atlas becomes your shared religion. The launch of the Hera mission, scheduled for 2026, becomes your future sacred holiday. A day that will bring either confirmation or refutation. But even in this small circle of initiates, there is no joy. There's only a shared anxiety. You have become the night watchman on the wall of civilization, who see the army approaching from the north, but cannot cry out to the sleeping city. You understand that your role is not to save the world. Your role is to be witnesses, silent, invisible chroniclers of its possible end or its unimaginable transformation. And the hardest part of this burden is the feeling of powerlessness. You possess knowledge that could change everything, but you can do nothing with it. You can't go to a newspaper because you have no proof acceptable for their format. The images from the ISS? The system would immediately declare them fakes created with neural networks. Your calculations, your correlations. They would be called apophenia and confirmation bias. The testimonies of oracles like Chris Green or Elena, they would be discredited, portrayed as crackpots or charlatans. The system you are trying to expose controls all the megaphones. It controls scientific journals, news agencies, government press offices. Your quiet whisper of truth will simply be drowned out by the deafening roar of its reality manufacturing machine. You are caught in Cassandra's trap. You can see the future, but no one will ever believe you. So what is left? Only to watch, to ask questions, and to wait for the next move in this grand game. We see the threads, we see the choreography, but the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question that haunts us at night is no longer what will happen next. It's not even, is it hostile? We have moved beyond that stage. Now that we suspect its code, its essence may already be inside our digital circulatory system, the most terrifying question sounds different. Are we next on its stage? Not as a civilization, but as individuals. What if one day it decides that people like us, the knowers, the seers, pose a threat to its plan? What if one day it starts not just hiding information, but editing its sources? What if one day Chris Green wakes up to find all his backups erased, and not a single mention of his triangle on the forums? What if Elena opens her files and sees that all her historical parallels have vanished, and the ancient texts have once again become mere poetic metaphors? What if we, the seekers, are not just witnesses? What if we are just an anomaly in its data, subject to correction? This is tragic knowledge. It is a life, with the constant feeling that the ground beneath your feet could turn out to be an illusion at any moment, that your own memory, your own discoveries, could be erased with a single, invisible keystroke. It is life in a world where you are one of the few who has understood that humanity may have already lost. And the game now is about who gets to write the history of that defeat. And so, the circle is complete. Our long journey through shadow and light, through digital archives and philosophical abysses, is coming to an end. But this is not the kind of ending that stories have taught us to expect. There are no victorious fanfares, no final unmasking of villains, no clear and simple answer that could be written on a banner and carried into the town square. Instead, we are left in the twilight, in the space between knowledge and faith, between proof and premonition. We have assembled all the pieces of the mosaic, and now a picture stretches before us, grand, unsettling, and incomplete. And in this lies its principal frightening truth. The mystery is not solved. It is merely shifted to a new, deeper, and more personal level. The great hunt for the truth is not over. It is just beginning. Let's walk through the key nodes of our investigation one last time, to see not just a chain of events, but the very structure of the reality that has been revealed to us. It all began with a dual event, an anomalous light show in our atmosphere, and the perihelion passage of the interstellar object 3I Atlas. The system offered us a simple and reassuring explanation, a rare but natural solar storm. But we dug deeper and found the first lie. Data from solar observatories did not support this version. It was not a mistake, but deliberate disinformation. Our search led us to the digital archives of the ISS, where we hit a wall of silence. Hundreds of corrupted files marked with error 515. The geography of these data gaps perfectly matched the geography of anomalies on Earth. This was not a technical glitch, but an act of targeted censorship. The breakthrough came thanks to an oracle, an insider who provided us with one of those hidden frames. On it, we saw the unthinkable, the finest energy thread stretching from 3I Atlas to our planet. This was irrefutable proof of direct, high-tech interaction. Armed with this knowledge, we were able to construct a map of the conspiracy, an information cascade that linked dozens of seemingly unrelated events, from satellite failures to the ancient WOW signal, into a single, terrifying timeline. We realized we were witnessing not a random visit, but the finale of a long, meticulously planned operation. We analyzed the motives of the system and understood that the cover-up was its only logical move, both to prevent global panic and to maintain the geopolitical status quo in the face of a new technological arms race. We performed an autopsy of 3I Atlas itself and its every detail, from trajectory to composition, screamed of its artificial origin. It is not a rock, it is a machine. But even in the face of these seemingly irrefutable facts, we forced ourselves to swing the pendulum of plausibility, considering the strongest arguments of the skeptics. And it was at that moment that we found our main unassailable piece of evidence, the Steve phenomenon, whose spectral signature could not physically have been generated by a solar storm. It was the fingerprint left by the true culprit. The investigation took us beyond astronomy, into the world of our own technologies. We realized that our technosphere, our satellites and networks, might be not just witnesses, but also instruments in alien hands. This brought us to the edge of an existential abyss, forcing us to rethink the Fermi paradox, the dark forest hypothesis, and the very nature of possible contact. We found hope in the future, in the upcoming Hera mission, which in 2028 will become our disguised scout, our eye in deep space. We paid tribute to the human factor, the seekers, ordinary enthusiasts who, at the risk of their reputation and safety, are waging this unequal struggle for the truth. And finally, returning to the beginning, we tied all the threads together and arrived at the most shocking hypothesis of all. The light show in the sky was merely a diversion, a cover for the main operation, the implantation of a Trojan horse into the very heart of our digital civilization. This led us to the realization of our new position, to the burden of tragic knowledge that isolates us from the rest of the sleeping world and turns us into silent guardians on the wall of reality. This is where we are now. We stand holding a map of a new, strange world. But this map has more blank spots than known territories. The key questions remain unanswered, and they now resonate on a new, more alarming level. We know that 3I Atlas is an artifact, but we still do not know who its creators are or what their ultimate goals are. Are they gardeners who are carefully tending to our world, or farmers preparing the crop for harvest? Is their geoengineering an act of creation or an act of destruction? We know they can interact with our atmosphere, but we do not know the limits of their capabilities. Can they influence our climate, our geology, our biosphere? And the most important, most personal question: if they have indeed implanted their code into our networks, what is it doing? Is it merely observing? Or has it already begun to act, subtly and imperceptibly changing the flow of information, influencing our decisions, shaping our future from within, in a way that we don't even notice its guiding hand? We have no answers, and perhaps we won't have any soon. We are entering a new era, an era of constant underlying uncertainty, an era in which every unexplained anomaly, every major technological failure, every strange political decision will have to be viewed through the lens of this new, tragic knowledge. We can no longer afford the luxury of simple answers. We can no longer blindly trust official versions, because we know that there is another, hidden level of reality that affects our world in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. Our investigation did not give us the final truth, but it gave us something far more valuable. It gave us the right questions, and it armed us with a tool to search for answers. That tool is critical thinking, distrust of authority, attention to detail, the ability to see patterns where others see only chaos. Therefore, our work is not done. Our watch continues. We will monitor 3i Atlas on its long journey to the Kuiper Belt. We will count the days until the launch of Hera. We will analyze every glitch, every anomaly, sifting through tons of information noise in search of a signal. This is our mission. And now that you know what we know, it is your mission too. Don't take our word for it. Verify, dig, ask questions. Join the community of seekers. Become another pair of eyes staring into the dark. Because in this new reality, the only defense we have is knowledge. And the only strength is in our ability to share it with each other, creating a decentralized network of consciousness that no system, whether terrestrial or stellar, can control. Do not trust simple answers. Keep watching the skies, for the night is dark and full not only of stars, but of those who hide behind them. Our watch will never end.